What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're going to be doing the review of the Nike Metcon 9. Alright guys, so if you haven't already watched my first impressions video of the Nike Metcon 9, I highly recommend that you check that out before you watch this video. Also, during the course of my testing, I've been putting up training videos that are a little bit more focused on certain movements. So if you're interested in checking out what I thought about the Metcon 9 for those dedicated movements, definitely recommend that you check those videos out as well. Today, we're mainly going to be focused on the performance as a whole of the Metcon 9 and what it's been like to train in these as my go-to training shoe for the last 2 or 3 weeks that I've had them. And though I've been testing other training shoes as well, the Metcon 9 has really been the go-to training shoe that I have used, and it's the one that I've kind of always wanted to grab. But the reason why might actually surprise you. So first off, let's actually take a look at the construction of the pair that I've been testing, and that is the AMP version. So these are the ones that I've been running into the ground, trying to do as much as I possibly can in. And you know, I can kind of comment about the durability of these shoes. The first thing that I'd like to address is that the upper actually does a pretty good job in keeping clean. So I've rope climbed in these shoes, I've done burpees in these shoes, and they are still generally white. So since this is a brand new Metcon model, we have a completely different upper material that is a mesh that goes around the whole vamp, and then on top of that, at the medial side of the shoe, on top of the toe box, there are some 3D haptic pods which kind of look like Noble's super fabric, but they feel a little bit different. They're a little bit more rubbery, and that's to give you some more support and also durability in that area if you're dragging your feet across the ground. This mesh is very flexible, it's comfortable, but what I've noticed from it is that it's not very breathable. My feet have been getting pretty hot in these shoes, and I don't want to just blame it on it being like 90 degrees in Southern California. When I switch to other shoes that I've been testing, I notice immediately how hot the Metcon 9s run. Now, taking a look at the laces and lacing system, so there's no fly wire in this shoe, which is kind of interesting. It's the first Metcon that hasn't had fly wire in a really, I think ever. But the lacing system does a well enough job securing your foot and giving you a nice customized fit. The laces this year are actually pretty good. They're cushioned oval laces and they stay tied really well. Another thing returning this year is the lace lock pull tab so that you can secure your laces onto the tongue. One thing that bothers me about that is that the Velcro placement is a little bit low and actually interferes with the laces. So when you go to lace your shoes up, you actually kind of catch the laces every time. And over time, that's gonna definitely wear out the laces. The tongue construction is a little bit thinner than it was on the Metcon 8, but it's still cushioned and comfortable. Plus, it's gusseted on the sides so it doesn't move around. Now, coming around to the ankle collar of the Metcon 9, which is probably my favorite area of the shoe. The reason for that is because of the way that it feels when your foot's inside of it. It's nice and secure. There's cushioning all throughout the sides and at the back part of the shoe, but it's not so much that it ever irritates the back part of your heel. So at the back part of the shoe, you still have that Hyperlift insert, which is a piece of TPU plastic that stabilizes the heel. And in my experience, it's not as obtrusive as it was in the Metcon 7 and the Metcon 8. It seems to be a little bit shorter, so it doesn't run quite as far towards the middle of the shoe. And that's gonna be better for things like running, but it's still a plastic heel at the back part of the shoe. So while it doesn't get in the way quite as much as the previous two models, it's still there and it still feels pretty clunky in that area. But that's a give and take because it does also stabilize the heel pretty well. All right, now taking a look at the most controversial part of the Metcon 9, which are the sidewalls or the rope guard, most notably on the medial side of the shoe. I gotta be honest with you, after using these shoes for so long, it really just kind of blends in and goes away, and I don't really notice it there quite as much as I did when I first saw these shoes. At least it does what it is intended to do, and it does it really well. These are some of the best rope climbing shoes that you could possibly get. And there are some really good rope climbing shoes out there, but none that I've found that have quite the same amount of durability and that stay on quite as well as the Metcon 9. So on the rope guard, there are these little pods, and that gives you traction to go up the rope. Plus the lateral side is angled so you get a good grip on the side when climbing the rope. Now, one standout feature is that while a lot of shoes are good at climbing ropes, the ones that are usually not so good at coming down the rope. The rope guard on the medial side is curved so that when you're coming down the rope, you just slide the rope through and it just feeds through your feet without catching. It's really easy to come down the rope in the Metcon 9s. Plus, they do a really good job of staying on your feet. I will say the one caveat to that is that you do have to make sure that this is the part that contacts the rope, because if you don't get it on that area, you get it kind of towards the back or kind of towards the front, you're not really gonna get a good grip on that rope. Now, I've used these shoes for probably about 25 rope climbs, and there is virtually no damage at all. They're hardly even dirty. Moving on to the midsole of the Metcon 9, which is no longer the React foam that they were using on the Metcon 7 and Metcon 8. This year we just have a dual density EVA foam that is softer in the inside of the shoe, and then around the outside, the exposed foam here is your denser carrier foam. This shoe, to me, feels like it has more foam in general than both the Metcon 7 and the Metcon 8, with the Metcon 8 feeling the most minimal of the bunch. Because there's just more foam in general, these shoes are very, very comfortable. Though I will say that this EVA foam, or whatever foam that they're using, does not feel as responsive as either the Metcon 7 or the Metcon 8's foam. And like all of the Metcons of old, we still have a 4mm drop confirmed with Nike. Now, one of the more interesting design choices of the Metcon 9 is the outsole. So I'm not talking about the grip of the herringbone pattern, because it actually does a pretty good job of gripping just in general, but the forefoot design has a curve to it, and that is so that when you press down, it expands and then you get a better grip on the floor. It's pretty noticeable as far as the way that the curve feels. Like, you can kind of feel that the outsides press up against the ground, and then there's some space under like the middle part of your foot until you put pressure down. That can take some getting used to, and unless you're under some kind of load, it almost feels like it requires too much effort to get that part of the shoe down. I thought it would go away over my use, but it still hasn't flattened out at all. I noticed it the most when I was doing my deadlifts, but when I was landing my Olympic weightlifting movements, I did notice the forefoot of these shoes being actually more stable than the predecessors. The biggest negative of the Metcon 9 this year is that they are much heavier than any Metcon ever before, and they're just a heavy training shoe in general now. I weighed a men's 10.5 at 13.8 ounces, and I also picked up a pair of 11s as well, and those weighed in at a whopping 14.8 ounces. So 1 whole ounce for a half size, and that's kind of ridiculous. When it comes to sizing your Metcon 9s, I got these in both a 10.5 and a size 11, and I think that both of them actually fit pretty well. The reason for me trying out the size 11 was because on the 10.5, my outside toes kind of make contact with the lateral side of the shoe, and that's something that, while it's not too bothersome, I just kind of wanted to get rid of and see if the 11 would get rid of that issue for me, and it actually didn't. So what I'm feeling is that the Metcon 9s might run a little bit shorter in length, but the toe box is definitely wider in these shoes than it has been on any Metcon. That's most notably in the metatarsal part of the shoe. So if you had wide feet, I'd still say that these are a pretty good option for you, but just know that you still might actually have to size your Metcons up. For most everybody else, I'm still gonna recommend that you just go with your normal Nike sizing. I have my Metcon 8s in a 10.5. I have my Metcon 7s all the way down to a size 10, and some of those still fit me. I feel like the toe box, just shape in general, more closely resembles the Metcon 7's toe box versus the Metcon 8's, which is a little bit more pointy. For me personally, I never had width issues with the Metcon 8, and I also have more in toe, so that toe box actually might work out a little bit better for me. The one huge difference is that there's just way more metatarsal space in the Metcon 9. And I think if you're looking for that, the Metcon 9s are probably the widest training shoe that you can get right now. Now, another thing that people might not like so much about the Metcon 9 is that there is a pretty prominent arch. For me, it's not that much of an issue. My right foot has somewhat of a collapsed arch, but my left doesn't. And I notice it more on my right, but it's not too uncomfortable. But if you've got really, really flat feet, that might bother you a little bit. Otherwise, I think that the fit of the Metcon 9 is very comfortable, and that's probably the reason why I gravitate to these shoes more often than kind of anything else that I've been using right now. I know the burning question in everybody's mind is, are the Metcon 9s any better for running than the Metcon 8s and Metcon 7s? And the answer is kind of weird because the Metcon 9s are more flexible and they have better cushioning than either of the last two shoes. But they are much heavier and they are just a bigger shoe in general. These things are really, really clunky. Like the size 11 on me, even though I feel like it fits really well, it looks like, I mean, they're 2 sizes too big on me. So the reason why they're more flexible is because the Hyperlift insert doesn't run quite as far as it did on the Metcon 7 and the Metcon 8. So the flex point at the heel, if you're a heel striker, is sooner. And you're gonna like that about running in the Metcon 9s. But I will say that if you're hitting the back part of the shoe against the ground, it's still gonna feel very, very clunky. That plus the added weight of these shoes and size makes it almost impossible to not do. I found running on pavement in these shoes to be just as bad as it was on either of the last two models, and maybe even worse because of how heavy and clunky these shoes feel. With that being said, the cushioning on the Metcon 9s is actually better than its predecessors. So if all you're doing is runs on a curved treadmill like the Assault Runner, that curve is gonna help you out and make the Metcons feel a lot less clunky, and you're just gonna really get the benefit of the extra cushioning of these shoes. And while they are still pretty heavy, it felt much easier to run in these shoes on a curved treadmill than it was on pavement. I thought that these shoes were gonna be a lot worse than they were for bodyweight movements, but they were surprisingly pretty decent. I'm not gonna say that these are the best shoe that you can get if you're planning on just doing like lightweight plyometric gymnastics movements, but they're not terrible. The extra bit of cushioning does make it so that your feet stay comfortable during those longer sets of burpees and box jumps. The wider contact patch means that you can jump off the box, land, and get a really solid jump back onto the box when you're doing box jump rebounding. And the amount of toe grip means that getting up for your burpees is a seamless task. I never really felt like the weight of these shoes bogged them down for doing those bodyweight movements. But for some odd reason, I could not get a good set of double unders going on for the life of me in these shoes. I feel like I'm a pretty proficient jump roper, and I just could not string anything more than like 50 double unders in these shoes. And I don't know if it's the heft of the shoes, I don't know if it's the sheer size of these shoes, but I just had all the trouble doing double unders in them. I know that pretty much only pertains to CrossFitters, but it's worth noting, and I hope that I'm not the only one that sucks in double unders with these shoes. Okay, so when it comes to lifting, which is generally what Metcons have always been good at, the Metcon 9s are no different. These are still really proficient lifting shoes, and that goes for both barbell cycling, Olympic weightlifting, and also powerlifting movements, though I will say that these were not my favorite shoes to just squat in. And if that's what you're buying these shoes for, I think that the Metcon 8s might actually be a better shoe. The reason for that is because the amount of cushioning that these shoes have does make them feel a little bit vague. They're not as responsive as the React foam and in the Metcon 8. The only time that I really noticed that was in back squats, when you're just kind of sitting there, you're planted, your foot doesn't move around, the shoes feel planted to the ground, but it does take a little bit for the shoe to kind of just hook up and give you that power to stand up, which is really odd because I didn't notice that when I was doing my deadlifts. I was able to deadlift in these shoes without any issues. I felt like they were pretty responsive for just deadlifting. And I'd say that's probably because you don't have to balance quite as much for your deadlifts as you do for your back squats or your front squats. For Olympic weightlifting, I actually thought the Metcon 9s were better than either the Metcon 7 and Metcon 8 because of the increased ground contact that you get in the shoe. The way that the outsole geometry is shaped is that it gives you some extended contact points to help you stabilize when you land your lifts. The most noticeable difference between the Metcon 9s versus the Metcon 7s and 8s was the amount of medial forefoot stability. This lip right here makes it so that when you land your lifts, you're less likely to collapse inwards towards your toes, and I thought that really helped out for catching cleans and snatches. And also that forefoot grip is something that you don't have to worry about when you're doing those kinds of movements, because when you land, you're gonna put that pressure down, plus you're also under load, so it's gonna help you spread out the forefoot of this shoe. And even though there is more foam in the Metcon 9 that's generally less responsive than it was on the Metcon 8s, once you get used to it, it's still good enough for your barbell cycling movement. It was only really an issue for me early on lifting in these shoes, but once I got used to the platform and what it felt like, I didn't notice really being detrimental to any of my Olympic weightlifting movements or my barbell cycling. Okay, so when it comes to value, the Metcon 9s get a huge price increase over last year. The Metcon 8s retailed for $130. The Metcon 9s retail for $150. So, do you need or should you upgrade to the Metcon 9s? I'm gonna say that you probably don't need to upgrade to these shoes if you have Metcon 7s or Metcon 8s or Metcon 6s or Metcon 5s or any previous Metcon that you like and fit you just fine. The only person that I'd say might benefit from upgrading to the Metcon 9 is somebody that had a wider set of toes. Other than that, the differences in performance of the Metcon 9 compared to the previous Metcons of old can be a complete wash. While I did find that these shoes were comfortable, they were also very heavy. So doing your bodyweight movements and most notably running was not so good in the Metcon 9s. I thought that the ground contact was great for your lifting movements. I thought that these were pretty good to deadlift in, pretty good for Olympic weightlifting movements, but the cushioning on them was not that responsive to me for squatting, and that's something that I never had an issue with on either of the previous two Metcons. I think another person that would benefit from the Metcon 9s is somebody that was just really, really hard on your shoes. Like if you were a competitive athlete and you needed a shoe to rope climb in, and it was just a workhorse of a rope climbing shoe, then the Metcon 9s are probably going to be the best pick of any training shoe. Now that's not all to say that I don't like the Metcon 9s. I actually really enjoy working out in these shoes, and the main reason why I like them is because I find that they're just generally comfortable to wear on the daily. They have a nice wide forefoot. The shoe fits me pretty comfortably. I can slip my foot in easily. I really like the amount of cushioning that's at the heel part of the shoe. The hyperlift is not super clunky when you're walking around, and the weight doesn't really become an issue when you're just wearing these normally coaching and just generally training not too hard. But when you put the Metcon 9s up against a pretty stacked field of CrossFit shoes, they kind of fade into the background a little bit. You can get more comfortable shoes that are more flexible, better to run in, and also very stable for even less money than you're gonna spend on the Metcon 9. So unless you're somebody that just rope climbs like a madman, then you probably don't need to upgrade to the Metcon 9. But those are just my opinions on the Metcon 9, which I still generally think are a great training shoe. And I'd like to hear what you guys thought. Leave them in the comment section so I can see what you guys all thought about the Metcon 9s. If you guys have any questions about these shoes, feel free to leave them in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And as always guys, thanks for watching.